NelsonJoypad.com bring you another original. It's fucking great.
I've spent most of my gaming life playing some kind of shooter. Whether it's a first-person shooter like Call of Duty and Borderlands, a third-person shooter like Gears of War, or even games like Resident Evil and Metal Gear. It's safe to say that shooting games are my preferred choice of genre. And while I do have other interests within the computing world, there's always a special place on my hard drive for them. It's no over-exaggeration to say that the marketplace is flooded with these games. I mean, they're big money makers for developers, so it's only natural that many studios will pump these games out time and time again. The problem with the system is that in order for a shooter, especially an FPS, to shine, it needs to have something special, some standout feature or mechanic that makes it distinguishable from the rest of the herd. Tower of Guns is a new first-person shooter from developers Terrible Posture Games. It borrows elements from the roguelike genre, but ultimately fails to have the same endearing charisma of that style of game. Tower of Guns starts off on a strong footing, but it doesn't last long. The basic setup of Tower of Guns is simple in the extreme. You have to play through procedurally generated levels. There are a couple of modes available to play. One will see you battle through 5 layers of the tower. If you succeed, then you complete the game. The other main mode is to play endlessly. Tower of Guns starts off unbelievably strong. Its huge number of level layouts has an allure that I found almost irresistible. The first few rounds that you play are the best the game has to offer, with challenging encounters and what seems like infinite possibilities. This particular bubble burst for me about half an hour into the game. The enemies that you fight are too limited to offer much in the way of diversion. They'll either be stationary turrets that fire an assortment of attacks at you, flying turrets that do exactly the same thing, or smaller enemies that will either fly at you and explode or take pot shots from a distance. The lack of enemy variety really cut the enjoyment time of Tower of Guns for me, and while I may be a little bit harsh in this regard, it's only because Tower of Guns started so promisingly, only to drop the ball at almost the very first hurdle. That's not to say that Tower of Guns is completely lacking in any kind of enjoyment. The often fast-paced gameplay put me in mind of Quake. Dodging incoming cannonballs, spike launchers or explosive barrels feels responsive, and once you've leveled up your jump and speed skills by picking up buffs in the game, it really does give you some freedom of movement that you don't have when you start. The flip side of this function is that it can sometimes be difficult to get exactly where you need to go. The hang time on your multi-jump feels like an eternity in the fast-paced environments of the tower, and in contrast, it can make the freedom of movement seem sluggish. I know it's the dictionary definition of contradiction in terms, but it's true, mind-boggling though it may be. The buffs, upgrades and levelling up are all gained through pickups in-game. You can unlock kiosks with coins gained from defeated enemies. Some will be dropped as you destroy enemies, while others are hidden away in secret areas. Each zone will have a number of secrets to find. They will usually be behind false walls. I found my first one accidentally by walking over a section of floor that I fell straight through. It does encourage the player to explore the environment, but it feels kind of flimsy. It put me in mind of games like Duke Nukem and Soldier of Fortune. Old games that were excellent at their time, but they can't hold a candle to the more modern releases. Even though Tower of Guns launched in April 2015, it has that same feel. A game that came too late. There are plenty of weapons available, but you're going to have to work for them. To begin with, all you'll have access to is the pea shooter and a gun that fires a buzzsaw blade. In order to get access to the other half dozen weapons, you'll need to complete various tasks like destroying so many of a certain enemy type, completing the game, finding 5 secret areas in one mission, things like that. The weapons are really the main method of diversity in Tower of Guns, and depending on what weapon you have, you'll have to play the game a little differently. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it does add replay value in conjunction with the procedurally generated levels. You can level your weapon up by picking up blue chips as you play. Each weapon can only be upgraded to a maximum level of 5, but the firepower that you can command is impressive. If you take hits, it will actively lower your weapon level meter, giving you an extra incentive not to get shot, other than the obvious death and game over that is. I think Tower of Guns is a pretty decent game. Terrible Posture Games have clearly thought about how to take their game and make it stand out, even if they haven't exactly knocked it out of the park. I was delighted to have a surprise visit to Cake Town, a special zone that the game will load up for you at the start of certain runs. It's an enemy-free zone that threw fistfuls of upgrades at me. It's a really nice addition, and I think it will help players that may not have the reaction time to dodge the barrage of enemy fire that most levels will pummel you with. It helps provide an edge, a helping hand that I respect greatly. There is a story in Tower of Guns, but even after hours of gameplay, I'll be damned if I know what it is. The story is provided through text boxes that appear at the top of the screen. In the quiet, non-manic or death-defying moments of the game, I was able to read them, and the humour really struck a chord with me. The problem is that when you're in one of the many rooms that have more guns firing at you than you can shake a stick at, there's simply no time to read them. It's disappointing, as I feel that I may have inadvertently missed one of the best aspects of Tower of Guns. The only other issue of note that I had during my time with the game was in one endless run through, I had the most horrendous frame rate drop. There were a ton of enemies on screen, and it reduced the experience to damn near unplayable. I have to say that this was only one room out of dozens, so it wasn't the end of the world, but it was the moment that I made my mind up on Tower of Guns. There's nothing inherently bad about Tower of Guns. It has its flaws, but it also has some great aspects. I like the roguelike vibe that it's flirted with, and with a good selection of weapons and starting perks available, it does open itself up to a fair amount of replayability. Tower of Guns just doesn't feel right. It's almost like it's a game out of time. If this had been released even a few years ago, I'm sure that we would have heaped praise on it. But with such an oversaturation of the shooter market, I'm not sure it does enough to make itself unique. There is enjoyment to be had, just don't expect any shooter revolutions. Tower of Guns is a fast-paced shooter that feels old school. It's reminiscent of Quake and has a good selection of weapons for you to try out, along with plenty of perks to add replayability. Some of the game's mechanics can become hard to control after several upgrades. I had one severe instance of frame rate drop, but just the one. Tower of Guns feels like a game out of time, like it was born too late and missed its release window by a couple of years. It's a good enough romp to kill some time, but it's lacking anything to make it stand out from the crowd.